There we go. Very good evening, everybody. Warm welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine, presented by Pick n Pay. Thank you for joining us as another week gets underway, and a week which has me particularly excited. Now, generally, as the name of the show would suggest, I rather like wine, but I particularly like certain varietals, and one of those that for the last probably 2 or 3 years, I've found myself extremely enamored by has been Cabernet Franc. It's for so long been a bit of a background player in the South African wine industry, always not making too much of a fuss, sitting in a Bordeaux blend or a Stellenbosch blend, adding so much and yet not saying too much, being a very quiet part of a wine where often something like the Cabernet Sauvignon will take center stage. But Cabernet Franc has really come into its own, and especially in South Africa over the last few years. And this evening, we get to celebrate the champion Cabernet Franc from the recent challenge. The trophy winner is with us, plus 2 of the top 3 from directly under the trophy, as well as our judge. And we had to get her out on bail this morning to get her on the show, but I'm very excited to have her join us, as well as 3 fantastic South African wine estates, all talking and celebrating Cabernet Franc, and that will be coming up in just a moment. Cabernet Franc also being a good wine because it has got particularly chilly in Gauteng. I'm down to the Cape next week, where I believe it was 28 degrees today. The Cape Town winter is proving very different. Go climate change. But Johannesburg is cold, so some Cabernet Franc very, very welcome this evening. There is then a great conversation to be had, but before we kick into that, here's a quick look at some news from the world of wine. All right, we have got an event coming up. It's coming up this Thursday. It is Seriously Old Dirt. So this is the wine that sits below the Series M and the Series C in the Villafonte stable. It's one of just 3 that they make, and it's one that has proved a very, very popular wine indeed. The guys from Villafonte are styling Seriously Old Dirt as the official wine of Father's Day, which is next weekend. So if you haven't bought those socks or that Old Spice collection, then a bottle of Seriously Old Dirt might be your alternative. And the event is happening this Thursday. It is the Klein River Havarti cheese pairing. There's a toasted naan and there's a chocolate brownie, and all of that food will pick up on and play off a different element of that Seriously Old Dirt. So very simply, 600 Rand for the ticket. That covers the food and wine for 2 people. But if you're a member of the Pick n Pay Wine Club, as you should be, then 100 Rand comes off that ticket. It is online. I am your host. There's an added bonus. It is from 6 o'clock until 7 o'clock on Thursday. You get a link, you get the wine delivered along with the food ingredients, and Chef Jonathan will be there to take you through all of it. It's going to be a really, really good evening. If you haven't bought a ticket, there are still just a few left. We would love to have you along for the evening. So please do go and sign up and take advantage of that great discount if you're a member of the Pick n Pay Wine Club. And here's some really, really exciting news from the world of wine. It is not new news to us because we had got wind of this a little while back, but it's been made official out at Delheim. Nontlebo has been promoted to winemaker at Delheim Estate. Noni to her mates at the estate, and she will work under Roloff, you saw in the previous picture, who is the cellar master. Delheim Estate with such great history. And Nontlebo is from Pietermaritzburg originally, no real background in wine as a family, but she spent time in California, and she is now the winemaker officially at Delheim. And we're going to have her on the show next Thursday as we celebrate a rather special collaboration that Delheim are working on at the moment. And that is a really, really cool piece of news from the world of wine. Then Wine and Food Festival. This is coming up on the 2nd of July at Waterfall Park at the Mall of Africa. And it is your chance to win tickets. You just need to head over to the Pick and Pay social media platforms and tell us what you like, some red, some white, or some rosé. Even I can get that one right. And that hashtag there could get you 5 tickets. Now, this is one prize. There's another, and it was something we were promoting a little earlier on in the year. This was a chance to win a really, really cool prize with Pick and Pay. It took you down to the winelands, down to Stellenbosch and to Durbanville with Nederburg and with Nederburg in Paarl and with Durbanville Hills in Durbanville. It was a super prize, and this is how the winner's experience played out. So there we go. That was the Pick and Pay Wine Club prize. There were more coming up and more great experiences and some prizes coming up from next month on Dan Really Likes Wine again as well. Right now, though, let's go and celebrate somebody who got his own prize. He is the winemaker at Chamonix who won the trophy for Best Cabernet Franc. We also have the winemakers from Delaire Graff from Blaauwklippen, and we have the head judge, a towering figure of wine authority in South Africa. It's a warm welcome to Carrie Adams, to Narina, Cloete, to Neil Bruwer, and to Morné. Vrey. Guys, a warm welcome. Thank you for joining us, and lovely to have you all on Dan Really Likes Wine. And well done, Narina, Neil, and Morné, for surviving the gauntlet that is doing anything with Carrie, because most people tend to end up requiring bail for such interaction. Instead, you guys got, in your case, Neil, a trophy, Narina and Morné finishing in the top 3 for what is, I think, Carrie, a really pertinent challenge to be having at the moment, because I can't think of a wine, red or white, in South Africa that's gone through more of a transformation over the last few years in terms of kind of playing a bit role to now very much in the spotlight.
Well, Dan, yes. Hi, thanks for having me. It's fabulous to be with you and, of course, all the winemakers. And it was indeed a massive pleasure and a privilege to be chairing the panel of this Cab Franc challenge, which was put together by Celia, who does a fabulous job. We had 38 entries. I think, if I stand corrected, but I think there are around about 52 or 53 Cabernet Francs in the country to date. And as you say, 10, 15 years ago, we would have been lucky if we had 5. So it was quite a big category. I was really surprised. And before you arrived, we were just chatting amongst ourselves. The standard was exemplary. It really was difficult to judge because they just got better and better. They really, really are good wines. And we were chatting about Cabernet Franc, is the father. It's the parent of a lot of grape varieties in the Venus world. And it's one of my favorite grapes as well. I absolutely love it. It grows in varied sort of soil types and grows in many countries around the world. And I can remember when I first came back from England, I was working at Anglo and Vergelegen up on the Skarpenberg, towering above what is now Morgenstern. And I can remember saying to Julio Bertrand, this is the best place in the world to plant Cabernet Franc. And of course, he then went on to get Pierre Lurton from Cheval Blanc, which is possibly one of the most famous Cab Francs in the world. And he's been working. He was one of the first. And it just started to gather impetus. And I think there's a lot of winemakers in South Africa who have cottoned onto the fact that if you plant Cabernet Franc, you can sort of be guaranteed of a fabulous wine in a bottle.
The product that we're seeing now, and we'll get some more detail on our exact winners, is just getting better and better and better, which almost begs the question, Why do you think it took so long before Cabernet Franc reached this state of mainstream approval and appraisal by South African winemakers? And we've started to see it as a single varietal, as something more conventional, rather than the almost oddity it was for such a long time.
Well, I suppose you could ask the same question. Why do you think it took so long for us to understand that you've got to have things other than oak and alcohol in wine? It's part and parcel of this wonderful wine revolution that we've been seeing. The likes of you and me, who sit on the outside and chirp from the sort of boundaries. But I think that the South African industry is just discovering itself, and it's discovering so much more that it can offer. We've got a fab wine industry. We've got a fantastic climate. We're not Bordeaux, and we're not going to make Cheval Blanc, but we're making something similar, and we're making something jolly delicious. And I think, as I said, of the 38 entries, 30 of them were straight Cabernet Franc. 8 of them were Cabernet Franc dominated blends. And I'm still pretty much of a blend girl. I quite like to have some Merlot shoved into a Cab Franc, because Cab Franc has got a big, strong, muscly thing. And Merlot sometimes just gives it a little bit of a satin petticoat. So I quite like to have that. But having said that, some of these straight 100% Cabernet Francs that were entered were just extraordinary. Of course, the Journey's End, Cab Franc 2017, it won the vintage class, which we can't sort of ignore. But 2017 is not really vintage if you come to that. Anywhere else in the world, 2017 it hasn't even been released yet. And 2017 is a cracker of a vintage. So we're not going to take it away from Journey's End, who really did enter what I thought was just a stellar version of a vintage Cabernet Franc from South Africa.
Before we go into our individual winemakers, I think you summed up the state of the South African Cabernet Franc space as jolly delicious. I think that's a really, really good way of putting it. Are you, as head judge, able to give a very broad sense of where we are with our style of Cabernet Franc, and if there is something to it that makes it distinctly South African?
For me, I sort of put, when I'm tasting and smelling and certainly judging, I put things into colors, because I'm just one of those color code type people. And Cabernet Franc is normally red. I mean, that sounds daft. It is a red wine, but I associate red fruits and vegetables and things with Cabernet Franc rather than blue or black or purple. And I think that historically Cabernet Franc in South Africa was associated with bell peppers, which I don't like. I don't want my wine to taste like a bell pepper. I want it to taste like a red or a black grape. And Cabernet Franc really does taste like a red grape. It's got raspberry sort of wafts and whiffs. It's got some strawberry wafts and whiffs. It has got a little bit of that bell pepper to it, which makes it quite savory, which is quite nice. And then, of course, it's got this fantastic natural acid, which just makes it the best food red wine in the country, I think.
Well, let's see how that wine paired out with our 3 winemakers, starting with the person who needs the greatest congratulations, Neil. Chamonix Cabernet Franc, the best in South Africa at the end of all of the judging. But what was the response when you found that out? Was it a knowing, yes, I thought that would happen, or was there a bit of pleasant surprise to it?
No, there was definitely some big surprise to it. It was still a young wine, or it still is. We recently bottled it, and I said, okay, for me, I really enjoy the wine. I think let's just take a chance and put it into the competition. And then we were quite surprised when it said it won the trophy.
Which it did indeed, and congratulations for that. Where does Cabernet Franc sit for you guys as Chamonix? Is it a little side project you have some fun with, or is it increasingly becoming a real mainstream part of what you offer as an estate?
Yeah, so normally we like to say we focused on Chardonnay and Pinot Noir back in the day, but Cabernet Franc has slowly been creeping up to the 3rd spot and maybe the 2nd spot on the farm on the focus side. Because we do the straight varietal Cabernet Franc, and we do the Troika, which is our flagship on the red, which is also Cabernet Franc driven. So we see Cabernet Franc right on top there as one of the top 3 varietals on the farm. It does very well here. And we even decided to renew some vineyard and plant more Cabernet Franc on the farm because I think we didn't have enough. So that's also a good way to look at it.
And it's a wine that's got Carrie and her judges very, very excited. What about the general public response to Cabernet Franc? Is it a wine that you're finding people are more interested in? They want to try it. They like what they're trying. They're looking for more examples of either a Cabernet Franc or a Cabernet Franc-led blend.
Yeah, I think that's like the question you ask, why did it take so long for Cabernet Franc to become so familiar now? So I think we're looking away from Cabernet Franc because you're thinking this is this big wine in a bottle. It's not, you need to age it for a few years before you can drink it. But I think as soon as people try the Cabernet Francs at different farms, they're actually more surprised and they actually go into drinking more Cabernet Franc, I think. So I think the consumer is also getting onto the wagon and also helping us to produce more Cabernet Franc and also sell it and spread it throughout the local market and international market.
As a wine, for you as a winemaker, what are the challenges in making Cabernet Franc?
It's obviously, I think during the picking season, it's just to get the timing right. You don't want that green characters in Cabernet Franc. I think that's the main important part. And then my philosophy is just don't interfere too much and just trying to get that balance right and let the Cabernet Franc show its true colors, and you just supporting what that is with obviously putting in an oak or doing the maturation to a certain extent. But I think, it's just letting the wine show why Cabernet Franc is a good varietal to have in South Africa.
Winning a trophy shows that Chamonix are certainly doing it right. Not too far behind at all are our two other wine estates, Delaire Graff and Blaauwklippen. Before we look at that wine in particular, Narina, the state of Cabernet Franc, chatting to Carrie there and its evolution over the last little while. How have you seen Cabernet Franc develop and become a far more prominent single varietal in South Africa over the last few years?
Yes, Dan, definitely. It's actually exciting because it's one of the parents of Cabernet Sauvignon. There's this classic connection with the old world wine ranges and varieties and cultivars. So definitely it is there. It's exciting. For me as a winemaker, it's just you love making your Cabernet Sauvignon. I love making Cabernet Sauvignon, but Cabernet Franc is always something different. And it's really nice to see, to chat people and the consumers. People are really getting excited about it. So I really think they're starting to develop a bigger and bigger market out there. People are really understanding Cabernet Franc more and more and what it is and the interest and the interesting cultivar that it can be. So I get Carrie's excitement a lot. But yeah, definitely it's one of the exciting cultivars, I think, for the future, for South Africa, for the world, in a sense.
Carrie mentioned that green pepper element, and there always is that tiny little whiff of green in most Cabernet Franc as it comes through. Carrie also spoke about a South African style, and we're trying to avoid most of that green pepper. What's your understanding of a South African style of Cabernet Franc?
For me, in a sense, you don't want the green pepper and stuff. And I usually, in my tasting notes, write positive herbal, if it can be positive, because there is some cultivar characteristics that is Cabernet. It is in the genes of Cabernet. And there's definitely almost that potpourri / spiciness that you get from Cabernet Franc. I like it particularly, but definitely not green pepper. As you said, you're drinking wine, you want fruit. You don't want to drink wine mixed with some berry fruit, etc. But I think in terms of developing a South African style, I think we're heading in the right way. Tasting also on the awards day, the other Cabernet Francs out there, is really, I think, as Neil said, we are getting that point right, which is the majority or the main thing for me for Cabernet Franc is picking time. You must sometimes work on your nerves. Are you late? Aren't you too late, too early? You must get your picking time correct in order not to getting too agitated and picking too early, because then you're definitely going to get some of that green character, and that's not going to go away no matter what you do. So I think as South Africa as a whole, we're getting, and I think we're understanding Cabernet Franc, And yes, exciting, I think. And if things go as it's been, and I've been seeing on the awards as well, I think Cabernet Franc for South Africa can be something for the future. And yes, it's fruit driven, it's pure fruit, it's red fruit, and it's very well balanced.
The enthusiasm, Narina, suggests this is a grape that you not just really enjoy working with, but that you really enjoy turning into something quite special, as the results of the challenge would show.
Yes, definitely. It's as I said earlier, I like Cabernet Sauvignon, but Cabernet Franc, it's something different. It's when it comes to the cellar, it's something different to work with. And yes, I really like, it's a bit of a challenging stuff. And I almost, with Blaauwklippen's Cabernet Franc, I can't complain. It's one of the, let's call it the easy varieties coming through the cellar. It's literally the fruit that I get from the vineyard. I can just see through the process. You're just actually managing it and preserving what the vineyard gave you from the block what you have. So you don't have to pull out all the tricks out of your pocket that you can do. You're literally just taking that fruit, preserving it, and bottling it for generations to come.
Of which I hope to be one. We'll look at the wine specifically and why it's done so well in just a moment. But let's head over to the other side of Stellenbosch and Morné Vrey, who's just emerged from the spa at Delaire Graff, where he spends most of his afternoons to talk to wine. Morné, lovely to have you back after a busy weekend out in the bush. Cabernet Franc and Delaire Graff. We've had many conversations about red wine at Delaire Graff, and I know the role that Cabernet Franc plays in many of them, but as part of a greater picture. What about Cabernet Franc on its own at Delaire Graff?
Hi, Dan. Thank you. Yeah, no, the Delaire Cabernet Franc, it's always been a big project for us to really just start to understand the vineyard. We've always just used it in our Botmascop blend. And just after so many years of working with the variety and understanding the variety, and I think most importantly, viticulturally understanding the vineyard, I think we do sometimes suffer a bit at that herbaceous character, especially in the Bannock Valley, where we're a bit more elevated, where our soils are very kind of rich and vigorous. So you have to really control the vigor to kind of try not to get too much of that vegetative growth in the vineyard, because in the end it will show in the vineyard. So I think from a viticultural point of view, that we kind of came to a point where I think we are more confident to showcase Cabernet Franc as a bigger component or a bigger portion of a blend. And yeah, so definitely the Bannock, I think if I look back at the top 20 out of the competition, 4 of those wines came out of the Bannock. The Bannock is a very particular special site for Cabernet Franc, and for Delaire, it's just fantastic to work with the variety. It was a vineyard that was planted in 1999, completely virus-free. We really look after this vineyard because it's quite an important wine for us on the estate, because we only have 20 hectares of vineyard, so 1.2 hectare parcel on the estate is actually quite a very valuable part for us on the estate. And yeah, it's fantastic to work with the Cabernet Franc. I've learned a lot through the years of understanding the vineyards, and only, like I said, lately we've started to use that as a important wine. We only released this wine in 2016, the first wine, Cab Franc led blend. Yeah, it's an exciting project.
Cabernet Sauvignon is the red grape that most people know from your particular part of the world, and for good reason. If there's somebody watching at the moment, Morné, who drinks Cabernet Sauvignon, they don't really know Cabernet Franc, swap your red cap for a market cap, sell Cabernet Franc to the uninitiated. Why should people be having a crack at this, going to try it out and sample something different?
No, definitely. I think there's definitely, as Carrie mentioned, the red fruit is very prominent in the wine. It's got that perfumey, violety character, and the tannin structure normally is much lighter. It's got a juicy, fresh mid palate always, and definitely if you compare the style of the Loire and Bordeaux, it's Loire style is always more the austere, more bright, leaner style of Cabernet Franc, and we see that style quite in a few parts in Stellenbosch, and even other parts of more lower lying sandier soils, where we are, we get a bit more of the riper, richer, more structured style of Cabernet Franc, which you can compare to Bordeaux. So definitely there's a stylistic excitement also of the two different kind of, if you want to find yourself in either Loire or in the Bordeaux area. So there's definitely that stylistic difference, and it's quite nice to find some of those really pretty austere, light, crisp styles of Loire style Chenin in South Africa, and there's some very great examples, but equally there's some great examples of very classic Bordelais style of Cabernet Franc. Definitely exciting variety. And then, of course, we, as a estate, has been, for the last 15 years, been making a rosé from Cabernet Franc as well. And there I've also learned so much from that point of view of Cabernet Franc, completely a different style of Cabernet. It's just a rosé, 100% Cabernet Franc. So it's definitely exciting variety. And it's a variety that we at Delaire work a lot with. And it's very exciting.
And it's a variety we're seeing more of on restaurant wine lists, we're seeing more of on pick and base shelves, and we are seeing in the headlines because of competitions like this one, Carrie. So well done for putting it all together. Who was involved alongside of you in slugging back gallons of Cabernet Franc to work out which was best?
Well, it was myself. And there was Lizette Tolkien and Greg Mutambi. And the three of us spent a terribly happy day slugging it all back. And I think one thing, Dan, that we should actually just mention to all your listeners is that everybody's making it sound quite easy just because it is a relatively hassle-free grape. We've got some super smart winemakers in South Africa, and you've got three of them on your show tonight. They're being very humble and modest about their doings, but their wines were absolutely polished. That's what you need. You need beautiful, polished, bright, fruit-driven, smooth red wine. That's what people want to drink, and that's what they are.
Which I think partly answers my next question, but I shall ask it nonetheless, because I'm sure there's a little more to it. It's all well and good for Carrie Adams, wine expert, to pick up a glass and say, yes, this is lovely. I shall proclaim it very good. But there's got to be some kind of structure, and something has to drive that structure. What are you as judges looking at in a Cabernet Franc to say, right, this is a trophy winner, this is our top three, this is a standout wine?
Well, that's a good question. I sound like, who was that old minister in that government? Anyway, it was a good question. So for me, wine needs to have an exoskeleton and a sort of a mesoskeleton. It needs to have bones and flesh. And Cabernet Franc pretty much has its own bones, and it also has its own flesh if you can finesse that fleshy fruit out. So that's what you look for. You look for the structure that's like the coat hanger, that stands up nice and tall, and it's got a straight backbone, and it's beautiful. If you finesse the fruit, and you don't have to do too much to it if you've done it in the vineyards, you normally get it in the cellar, you'll end up not with what could actually possibly be with Cabernet Franc. Some of them can be quite clodoppy and clumsy. But if you speak to it nicely and you stroke it perfectly, it ends up with this lovely elegance that Cabernet Franc is famous for. You know, I always cite the example of racehorses with skinny ankles. Cabernet Franc should have skinny ankles. Buy the horse with the thinnest ankles. It'll win all the races. And Cab Francs generally should have those beautiful skinny ankles and then a bit of a sort of 38, 28, 38 body. And that's sort of what you're looking for in a Cab Franc. Otherwise, you're going to get a green, mean, nasty, parsimonious wine.
Which is not what we want. It's certainly not what we got with our top performers in the Cabernet Franc Challenge. So let's go back to Neil. And I must say, Neil, there's a little bit of nostalgia to me having you on the show this evening, not because you and I have spent a great deal of time together, although hopefully that will change going forward, but because when I was at UCT, Chamonix was a regular haunt, and the Chamonix Rouge sat rather nicely on my limited student wine budget, and I have great memories of tastings, certainly of arriving at tastings, not always of leaving them. So to be able to go back and celebrate with Chamonix today is lovely, and to do so with one of my favorite grapes. What is made for you this wine stand out? What's had it jumping out of the glass for Carrie and her team?
I think when we saw the final product, or just prior to the blending, or prior to bottling, we noticed this was a well-balanced, every barrel that we decided to take into the blend was actually well-balanced. There was a lot of fruit. There was, like Morné said, you got that violets. So there was a lot of components to work with. But I think also for the vintage, 2020 vintage was a very good vintage. It wasn't a very difficult. We didn't have a lot of challenges on the rare side, or especially on Cabernet Franc side. So I think it actually showed later on, after the maturation phase, it actually all came together well. Like there was perfect acidity. There was enough tannins, not too much. I think everything, the fruit was there. I think everything just came together well, and I think that was a good example of the vintage that showed that was a real good one for us in Franschhoek.
And speaking of Franschhoek, if I think of some of the better Cabernet Franc I've had in the last few years, the Anthony Rupert Cabernet Franc, my wife demolishes the moment she sees it, so that has to be kept under lock and key. I've had several from Gerard, and I think his reserve did particularly well in this competition as well. Is there something about Franschhoek, Neil, that really lends itself to Cabernet Franc?
I think Franschhoek in general is very unique. I think we've got a lot of different microclimates on each estate, and I think each estate is quite different with producing their Cabernet Franc. Like we even saw on the show when we tasted some of the final or the winners of the competition, everything, not one wine was the same style. Everything was different. So that's what's also nice about Cabernet Franc. You don't get the same style everywhere, not even in Franschhoek. And we're talking about 1 kilometer or 2 kilometers to your neighboring farm. I specifically think it's the soils. There's great soils in Franschhoek for Cabernet Franc. We've got multiple climates. We've got warm climate and cold climate in like more than one season in one day, which is good for Cabernet Franc, I think. I think there's not enough Cabernet Franc in Franschhoek, but with the Cabernet Franc that we have in Franschhoek, people are doing exceptionally well. So I think Cabernet Franc is also being seen as one of the leading varietals in Franschhoek. So I think that is really good for the varietal itself and for Franschhoek. Like you said, Olden Mans did very well with their Cabernet Franc. I think the year before that was Mayvane, also in Franschhoek. So I think that also tells something that Cabernet Franc actually belongs in Franschhoek.
It clearly does, although there is competition for its spiritual home from a couple of other areas, Stellenbosch being one of them. Josephine Vrey is watching from France at the moment. Félicitations to Narina, Morné and Neil. Not an easy grape to understand and a big challenge to make a good Cabernet Franc, a challenge that has been met quite comfortably by our winemakers. Narina, top 3, so a really, really good result here and a fitting tribute to a wine that's, I think, a little different. This was the blending competition, is that right? Tell me the story of this wine.
Okay, so Daniel, I can get some acclaim, but I must also give some for the award to the blending club that won it. So since it's that year, last year was the 38th Blaauwklippen blending competition. So we still have it every year since in the 80s when Walter Finlayson started it. And literally wine clubs on all those South Africa or the world, they can enter this competition. Every year I give them a brief, what they need to blend. They send in their blends via email. I make bench blends. We judge it blindly, and the winning blend gets bottled. So that's the blending competition very shortly. But yeah, last year, this wine was actually the scope for the blending competition from last year was to prepare a Bordeaux-style red blend. And the clubs had Cabernet Franc, Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, and Petit Verdot to use. And in the end, me and my fellow judges, so we actually say, yes, we did good judging as well on our part. And it was a Cabernet Franc-led blend that in the end won the competition, which is in the end 41% Cabernet Franc, 33% Merlot, 18 Cabernet Sauvignon, 8 Petit Verdot. And this comes from a Somerset West club called Business Time. And I think there are 2 engineers and a sound engineer. So they are totally out of the wine industry, but they did super clever blending. So on the one side, thank you very much for Business Time for superb blending. On the other side, I made the components, me and the cellar team in the vineyard, we made the components. So it's a bit of both. But it was really, I remember judging, and this wine really is one of those wines you remember throughout the lineup through judging.
This sounds like something the Dan really likes wine team needs to be part of in 2023, Narina.
Definitely. Actually, the competition is already started for this year. I'm prepping the kits because every year we send out the kits. So the kits is being sent out next week, and the kit is basically a 750 ml of each of the components, a 100 ml measuring cylinder, and then the specs or the brief I gave them. And I usually try to do something that, like this year, one of the components or one of the cultivars I've got limited volume for. So almost what you sometimes get in the cellar, you want to add 80% of one batch and you can't because you only have enough volume to add 50% into a blend, for example. So I try to give them that type of scenarios, what you really face in real day winemaking, blending life. But yeah, you can look for our website. It's exciting. It's always fun. It's interesting because you get clubs that have been entered for 20 years and then they don't win something. You get clubs that win the first time. This particular club, Business Time, I think they entered 6 times. And in the 6 entries, in the four of them, they were in the top 4. And then last year they actually won it. So somehow they're super blenders.
And using Cabernet Franc to great effect, making music with their wine as befitting a team with sound engineers. I think it's a really, really cool competition and clearly lots of fun as well. I caught a faint whiff of piri piri in the air, and that suggested Emile Joubert was somewhere nearby. So reporting in from under a table at the Diaz Tavern in Greenpoint, meticulous green harvesting by baboons gives Chamonix an unfair advantage. Primates still have French Huguenot DNA. Mr. Joubert, lovely to have you watching the show. In fact, Emile's going to be one of our guests on the show for Chenin Blanc Day later this month with a specially selected bottle to celebrate. So a blended wine there from Blaauwklippen, catching the eye of the judges. What about the Banhoek? Morné, what has made this particular wine for you celebrate your terroir and your cellar quite so well?
Well, then, thanks. I think one of the key things, and Carrie also mentioned it, is the 2017 vintage. It's been, in my career as a winemaker, it's been my most memorable, most fantastic vintage ever. Through the white wines to the reds, it's just been a really fantastic vintage. We had such brilliant balance. The acidity on the wines were all brilliant, and the tannic structures on all our wines, and it just kind of showcased exactly each variety, showcased what it is, what it can do on Delaire. This is a blend of mainly Cabernet Franc, of course. It's a Cabernet Franc competition. It was 55% Cabernet Franc, there's 35% Cabernet Sauvignon, and a little bit of Petit and a little bit of Malbec. But Cabernet Franc is by far the important one. And this is a wine that we call the Banhoek. The Banhoek it's like I mentioned, it's a very kind of nice area that's quite known for Cabernet Franc. And we really just wanted to celebrate the area and celebrate what we do great with red wine. I'm very happy that this wine is doing well and very well accepted by all my friends and the peers and the industry. It's a really fantastic wine to be working with, and it's definitely something that we will continue in the future for many years to come, because it's a fantastic variety, it's a fantastic blend, and it's a fantastic showcase of Delaire and the Banhoek Valley.
And Narina's just spoken about the blend that did so well for them. For you as a winemaker, what's the secret to getting a Cabernet Franc blend just right? What do you have to leave Cabernet Franc to show, and what are you trying to plug into that blend to maybe fill the gaps that Cabernet Franc is leaving?
Yeah, I think with this blend, it's very important that Cabernet Franc should be the important character, the most important character in the blend. For me, then, in terms of the winemaking, we try not to over oak the Cabernet Franc, because it's such a gentle, elegant variety that you can very, very easily, with too much oak, can kill that kind of the prettiness of the variety. You can kill the purity and the brightness of that. So for me, it's very important. And then also to work on the percentages, to kind of just let the other varieties contribute to elevate the Cabernet Franc, to kind of still the showcase, and the main purpose of this blend is to really to make Cabernet Franc taste even better. Just Cabernet Franc give a bit more of a boldier, more richer mid palate, where the Petit is the perfume. It's like it lifts the wine. The Malbec, it's just kind of that little bit of spiciness. And we in the Banhoek, we're very well known for that kind of minty, herbaceous spiciness that we get in the valley. And it's luckily, I think in the last few years, people are starting to accept that character much more as a positive rather than a negative. And I really like that, especially in the Cabernet Francs. We get that really kind of lovely Banhoek character in our Cabernet Francs. And to be working with 22-year-old virus-free Cab Francs in the valley is also fantastic.
It's not confined to just the Cabernet Franc in your part of the world. I think of the mint Cabernet Sauvignon from just across the road. So it speaks to a lot of the reds, but particularly, as you say, to the Cabernet Franc. Carrie, judges' thoughts on those two blends. First of all, the Blaauwklippen. Get some people to have a competition, throw some wine together, and it wins a prize. Pure luck, or did you sense that there was something special to what these guys have managed to put together?
I don't know, because, we taste completely blind. So we had absolutely no idea what was what. But I kept on going back to that wine. And as I said to you, I was a little bit swayed, because I prefer it to be blended rather than a 100% cultivar. But it was just a really clever blend. It gave the beautiful, there was quite a lot of violet on that blend from memory. And the violets came through on both the Bunhoek and the Blaauwklippen. And I love that English violet. People who live in South Africa sometimes don't know what English violets smell like. And I suppose not many people know what they taste like, but they smell too beautiful. And you pick up English violets sometimes on Rhone wines as well, but specifically on the Bunhoek and the Blaauwklippen was that beautiful floral nose, which I found extremely pretty, as did the other two judges. And we kept going back to that Blaauwklippen thing, saying, we're not sure what's in here. We know that it's a blend, but it's very feminine and very, very pretty, and we like it, and we want to give it an award. So that's how that one came in. But again, that English violet perfume, you almost want to bottle that Delaire Graff stuff as a perfume. We need to get hold of Esther Lauder. I know the lady who runs Esther Lauder. We need to get hold of her and get her to make a Cabernet Franc perfume, because it is so pretty.
There'll be some furious Googling going on at the moment as people try and get a whiff of it. I'm not sure if you can effectively Google a smell, but I suspect people will be trying it nonetheless. Carrie, I want to come back to you in a sec for a look forward to the world of Cabernet Franc, but let's go back to our winemakers. Narina, first of all, on Cabernet Franc, we seem to have come a very long way in a short period of time. I think 1998, which is less than 25 years ago, was Norma Ratcliffe giving us South Africa's very first single varietal Cabernet Franc. So less than 25 years, big steps taken. Where to from here, do you feel, for Cabernet Franc in South Africa?
I think it's only upwards. Definitely, as I said earlier, it is something that's growing in interest from, I think, as winemakers, we love making it. There's more winemakers liking the challenge to work with it. The viticultural side is they are really getting to know, as Morné also said, working the correct way with the vineyards, that you don't get the green flavors picking at the right time, etc. So really the viticultural practices are getting up to speed. And then in the consumers are really starting to look for it, ask for it, and understand it. So I can think it's one of the, I think, niche varieties that can starting to grow and become more than just a normal niche variety. So definitely, I think it can only go get better and better and bigger, if you want to say it that way. Definitely there's market for it, I think.
Which would suggest, unsurprisingly, that Cabernet Franc has a big role to play for Blaauwklippen. What about the rest of Blaauwklippen? What's on the horizon? What are you particularly excited about at the moment?
Blaauwklippen for us is where we are situated. It's red wine country. Up on Blaauwklippen's side, we're focusing definitely more on Cabernet Sauvignon. The Cabernet Franc at this point in time is more a blending component, or year and bits and pieces that I bottle separately as Cabernet Franc. But then the other exciting one, which is going on at Blaauwklippen, is actually Malbec. Malbec is really doing superbly well in terms of quality, in terms of sales, etc. And it's almost, I think, what we've done now between me and the viticultural team and viticulturists, we got that balance right. It's really also one of those things. He knows how to cultivate it, and I just take it through the cellar, and it's an easy wine. It's a very pretty wine. It's really popular. So I would say Cabernet Sauvignon, Malbec blends, and then Cabernet Franc is increasing a bit.
Sounds like we're going to have you on a Malbec show soon. Another grape I am rather fond of. And one last one for you quickly, Narina. Seen some stories of late, Blaauwklippen and Van Leeuwen. It's an interesting partnership. What does that entail?
It's a merger between the two companies. for it's positive from both sides. So it's basically a merger 50-50% between the two companies, in a sense, the one helping the other. So yeah, that's basically it in short.
Does that make you the fifth cousin?
No, I don't think so. But yeah, it's really going well and stuff like that. But yeah, no, I don't think I'm the fifth cousin yet. Sorry if they're watching. I don't know. The Retiefs can confirm, but yeah, I don't have the same surname.
Well, maybe Ben Carl instead. All right, exciting times at Blaauwklippen. Exciting times too at Delaire Graff, because it just always is. I know Damien has joined the team looking after the marketing. And there's always something new, Morné, that you seem to be tinkering about with in the cellar and preparing to show us. And one of those wines, in fact, you very kindly invited me to come down and join you next week. Sadly, I'm not able to make it. But you've got a release of something rather luxurious next week.
Yes, Dan. Yeah, it's the launch of our 2017 Lawrence Graff Reserve, which is 100% Cabernet, and the Cabernet vineyard is next to the Cabernet Franc vineyard, so they do share the same terroir, same everything, but it's also planted the same year. Yeah, it's going to be a great launch. Unfortunately, not going to make it. We'll definitely make our own little launch there one day when you're there. But it's exciting time for us, and it's 2017 vintage again. It's a vintage that we celebrate. It's a vintage that just really will just, I would never forget this, the elegance and the purity of the vintage. It's one of those like once in a lifetime vintages for me, and it's so nice to just only showcase. I need to go launch the 17 now, because now you can really see the energy in the wine. You can see the true Cabernet Sauvignon characters that we're well known for on Delaire. Yeah, nice. It's going to be a nice evening.
I remember when we had, I think it was you, Stuart, and Nick on, and possibly one other from the Bannock, and I put the question to you of 15 versus 17, and everyone was going 15. What an amazing vintage. And I think you, in your own quiet way, just said, actually, Dan, I think 17. And there were some barely muted chuckles. How on earth can Morné think 17 would be better than 15? I think there are probably quite a lot of people in your camp now.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a vintage that was a all-round vintage. Like I mentioned, the Sauvignon Blancs were brilliant. The Chardonnay is fantastic. We're tasting at the launch next week. We only tasting 17 wines from the estate, and the Chardonnays are just singing at the moment. They're bright, they're acidic, they're pure. They taste like it was a 2020 vintage. It's a really fantastic vintage, and yeah. So we're gonna. I think I was right.
I think you were. We'll be tasting that brand new wine from Delaire Graff in the next month or two. Let's head back to Franschhoek and to Chamonix. How was the trip to Europe, Neil? Because you're only just back from that. A busy time, but a successful one.
Yeah, definitely. It was nice to go overseas again and then see all the importers and obviously be face to face and have a nice chat about the wine with actually the clients on that side. There was an event that was postponed from, I think, end of 2019 until this year. So there was a lot of excitement going around it or around this trip. And we even showed the Cabernet Franc and our Troika there, which is Cabernet Franc lead blend and this Cabernet Franc, and the people actually enjoyed it. So I'd say it was a big success. It's not that fun always to come back in the middle of winter, but yeah, it was good to see the people again and just get out there a bit and show more of our wines on that side and what the quality is that we can share from our side.
And not just the quality, but also what the reaction is, because the South African palate is not always commensurate with the German palate or the Belgian palate or the Dutch palate. What were people really taken by in terms of the wine that you were showing in Europe?
I think if I can say, I think it's more that they expected something different that we can that we showed, even with our Chardonnays as well, even with the Cabernet Francs. I think the more the fruit driven, the more balance with the Chardonnay as well. It's more fruit focused. It's not overall. It's the balance of the wine. It wasn't overpowered with oak. Wasn't overpowered with too much acidity. There was great balance and everything. So I think they were quite surprised of how good the wine showed. And so I think that's what actually caught them off guard. They were expecting something different that was actually showed.
We aren't surprised even if they were. Just quickly in closing, Neil, you've got a trophy. It's been a good 2022. I know you won't be resting on those laurels. What sits on the Chamonix horizon that's really got you excited?
Yeah, so I think we will probably be ending off with all the 2020 wines getting in barrels and into bed for the year. So that's going to happen next week or end of next week. We started bottling some of our 2020 vintages, which is also exciting. Our Sauvignon Blanc, our Pinot Noir Rosé, and our Unoak Chardonnay. And then in a month or two, we'll probably start planting some vineyard on the farm, which is also exciting. It doesn't happen every year. So that's good step forward and something positive to come from our farm and from something to look forward to for new vineyards, new wines to come. And so I think I'm looking very forward to that.
Plenty of attractions at Chamonix, and that's without even mentioning the large safari park they have as part of their wine operation, but we will leave that for another day. Carrie, just in closing, it was you who said that we had 3 extraordinarily smart winemakers on the show. We certainly have, and they've produced wine that wowed you and your judges and set something of a benchmark. But we are never a country that says, right, well, that's good enough and we'll leave it there. We like pushing onwards and upwards. Where to for here, do you think, for South African Cabernet Franc? And what do we need to do to improve on what is already clearly a very strong offering?
Well, I certainly think we're heading in the right direction, that's for sure. There wasn't really a single wine that was in the lineup for judging that I wouldn't recommend. So anybody who can get hold of the list of entrants for this competition should try them all. They're fantastic. And look for that finesse, look for that beautiful red berry fruit, look for that gorgeous English violet nose, the natural acidity that makes it such a brilliant food, lunchtime dinner wine. I mean, you just have it for breakfast too if you want. But we're definitely heading in the right direction with Cabernet Franc. I think there's a lot more planting and there's a lot more becoming familiar with it because it is quite new as a category in South Africa. So all on the right track. I'm so excited. Thanks to Celia for putting together such a nice competition. There was no fuss and no performance. Just a whole lot of really, really nice wines from a whole lot of ingenious young winemakers. And thanks to you, Dan, very much for showcasing it on your show, which we also love.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure, and returning the favor because you've had me as a guest on your show on a number of occasions. So glad I was able to reciprocate, and glad I was able to spend some time with all of you celebrating Cabernet Franc and the space in which it finds itself in 2022, which is one I think we can all watch on very, very proudly. So, Neil, congratulations again on the trophy. Which I believe is sitting beside your bed at home and gets watched over every evening. Well done. Congratulations. Narina, well done as well. And I'm going to start getting my team together. I suspect it might be a bit late for 2023, but maybe 2024 I'll be coming in hot for the Blaauwklippen Challenge. And Morné, sadly not seeing you next week, but I will be down soon and trying a number of things, but that Van Hook in particular. And Carrie, always a pleasure spending time with you. So guys, thank you all very much. Keep making wonderful wine, especially Cabernet Franc, and look forward to having you all back on the show again soon.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Here we go. The Cabernet Franc Challenge, the trophy, the overall best on show went to Neil Bruwer for his Cabernet Franc Reserve 2020 from Chamonix. 2 of the top 3 performers, the Van Hook from Delaire Graff and the Blaauwklippen blend. That was a blending competition with a strong guiding high hand from Narina out of Blaauwklippen. And those just a couple of examples of a wine that either as the main act in a blend or as a varietal on its own, really making waves and getting more and more fans by the day as new wines and new vintages are released. And that pretty much sends me off to go and try some Cabernet Franc as the fire gets going and another cold Johannesburg evening sets in. It might be even colder come Thursday because I'm going to be up in the Kruger National Park where I will be joined by Ken Forrester. We are at the Legacy Experience. I'll be hosting that for Kevin Peterson, his annual conservation fundraiser in the Kruger, where we raise money for the preservation of rhinos and the fight against poaching, but we'll squeeze some wine in. And not just Ken, we will also be speaking to the team from Bilkot-Salmon. They'll be joining us from France on what promises to be a lovely evening in the bush with one of South Africa's great wine heroes, as well as a rather well-known French champagne brand. So that is Thursday. Next week, amongst other things, we'll be chatting to the guys from Delaire. We'll be celebrating Chenin Blanc Day. And as always, raising a glass to great South African wine. Have a good evening. Thanks to our guests. This is Dan Really Likes Wine, presented by Pick n Pay. Have a good evening. Good night. To join the Pick n Pay Wine Club, simply SMS your smart shopper number to 36775. It's absolutely free, and you'll get for yourself 3 times the smart shopper points on every bottle of wine bought. You'll also get a 20% discount on 10 different wines each month, a 25% discount on a case of wine, and a Magnum, some terrific competitions and invitations to awesome events.